I'm Michèle Ohayon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm actually a dinosaur. I may not look like one, but I started my career in film, actual film, celluloid, 16 millimeter that you can actually touch. I was told to tell a bit about my background. I was born in Casablanca in Morocco. My father was in charge of getting Jews out of Morocco during and after the war because they were afraid that something would happen in North Africa as well. So he worked undercover for the Mossad. So I already lived in some fiction spy world that inspired me. We immigrated to Israel, and when I was 6 years old, I didn't speak a word of Hebrew, didn't speak a word of English either. And very soon after, I realized that I really like to boss people around. It's called directing. And at the age of 12, I gathered all my friends from the hood, and I put a play together in Jerusalem. And I realized that I really was in love with storytelling and the impact it has, whether it was my friends or later on my colleagues, and after all these years, my audience, my beloved audience. For me, I also realized that as much as I love theater, and I also got a job at the Jerusalem Theater, so I could sneak in and watch Bertolt Brecht, Ima Courage, Mama Courage, and all other plays that re-inspired me. I realized that it was a two-dimensional way of storytelling, and it was not enough for me. I wanted another medium. I was very much in love with tech and how to play with tools. So after the army, I applied to Tel Aviv University of Film and Television. To my wild shock, I was accepted. And I started to learn the real art of storytelling through filmmaking, through cameras. I want to talk a little bit about, and I was asked to talk about how the digital era affected our way of storytelling. Especially for a documentarian like myself, I think it is very crucial, the mobility of cameras, the mobility of the cards, the storage element of the data. So again, when I started in 16 millimeter, it was great training for efficient storytelling because, first of all, the practicality of it is that you have a roll of film that is 400 feet, which is just under 10 minutes. So within 10 minutes, if you interview someone, you really want to get them to a point where they are opening their heart to you and that they are telling their truth. Because once you are there and after 10 minutes and you have to change the role, you break the flow of storytelling and you have to start all over. And for me, emotions are probably the most important thing in storytelling. I want to access people's hearts. I want you to see what's underneath all the layers. And for me to reach that, I cannot have interruption. So my crew was always making fun of me that after 400 feet or 10 minutes, my subject will be in tears. And if I didn't hit that mark, I was in trouble. So for me, moving to digital in that particular sense was great because I did not have to interrupt. I could go on and keep the story going until I reached the moment where I got it. So that was one thing. The other thing is, of course, the mobility of the camera itself that allowed me to get to places I would never get otherwise. So, for example, in College Straight Up, the film that Ido mentioned, it was about inner city kids, specifically in South Central Los Angeles. After the riots, everybody thought they were looters and losers. And I decided to tell a positive story that came out of Watts. And I went and I found an arts program that taught kids the performing arts as a way to get out of gangs and maybe graduate from high school and college. I followed them for about 4 years. And with my 16 millimeter camera, I needed a year just to do research, just to have them get used to the camera. So that I'm a white Jewish girl, I'm going to the hood, and it's very hard to create that connection. So within a year, I finally felt that I could really tell the story I wanted to tell, and they became my friends, they became my family. But if I had the cameras that I have today, I probably would have reached a lot deeper. Whether it's changing from daytime to nighttime, and you have to change the camera roll and move, and it is much more flexible than it was before. I'll just give you a little anecdote. So when I was granted access to film in a juvenile hall in LA, where one of my kids was detained. And it took me 6 months to get permission, and we go in and we film, and the footage is amazing, and we're so happy. We go back to the van, and the assistant camera, I tell her, download, put the roll aside, this is a very important role for me, and let's move on with the next role. So she was so excited that we did this great scene that she actually opened the magazine in the bright daylight, and everything was kaput. I had just a few minutes of it that was salvaged, but it had still this orange glow from the light, and I still used it in the film because I couldn't do it again. So I thought, with the digital era, great, this is never going to happen again. I have digital cards, and you all know, the little cards that we capture data on. So my next movie that I made is called Steal a Pencil for Me, and it's a love story that took place in a transit camp in Holland, Westerbork, and then later on carried on to Bergen-Belsen, two now Holocaust survivors, but at the time they were inmates who fell in love during the camp and wrote love letters to each other to keep each other alive. Their love letters were published at the Anne Frank Center, and the film is now used in Yad Vashem in Israel and everywhere else. So we went into Westerbork. I convinced my couple, who are now in their 90s, to go back to Holland, to walk in Westerbork, and to reminiscent on what happened there and how the love story took shape. So we're filming like crazy, and now this is the first time I'm shooting on HD cards, digital medium. And as we move the cards and download into the computer and move on, I see the assistant camera look at me with this pale face, and I don't like that pale face when I see it. And I'm like, what is wrong? What happened? And he goes, Michèle, we just shot over the card that you just shot this beautiful scene. And so there are no guarantees. You lose data no matter what, whether it's digital or not. I also want to talk about the digital art of storytelling and how it's different. I think I used to make theatrical documentaries. So you actually go to the theater, you sit there and you have an experience. So every little close-up, every little detail, every pause, every silence is revered on the screen. I can't do that anymore because, for example, this film I'm making right now, it's an original documentary for Netflix. I know it's going straight to Netflix. It's streaming. So I'm thinking if people are watching, I need to take into consideration that they may be texting, that they may be looking at their iPad, they may take a phone call, the baby is crying. So I can't afford anymore to tell the story the same way I used to tell it. So I find myself telling my team, especially my editor, something I have never said before, meaning be bold. Forget about the details. And I have never said it to my team because it was all about the details for me. And now I can't, because if you blink, you miss it. And I don't want you to blink, and I don't want you to miss it. So my concern right now as a storyteller is not necessarily how to make the most beautiful, delicate shot and what is it going to cut to, but it really is how to keep those eyeballs from moving away from the screen. And that is a huge impact for us. The pace of editing also has changed. I need to go much faster because I need to keep up with the short attention span that streaming and television and digital and everything, which I love, by the way, had brought. So there's a lot of adjustment that I have to make to keep the audience engaged. At the same time, I also have a lot of advantages. And I mentioned that in a way, the film training was a good training because I can film something very efficiently. People think that because you have a digital camera and you can shoot and shoot and shoot, you should shoot and shoot and shoot. But actually, first of all, it's not cost effective if you think about it from a practical sense. Yes, it's very cheap to shoot on digital. However, you have to store it. Those cards cost a fortune. One little chip like that costs $800. Second, somebody has got to put it in the system. Somebody's got to ingest it, hours and hours and hours of footage. You pay them. The editor has to watch all this footage, hundreds of hours of footage, to choose from. And they kind of become numb, and they can't even make a decision anymore. So no matter what, you still have to shoot efficiently as a storyteller. There is a great amount of freedom that comes with the digital era, but freedom can also be a curse. It's a blessing and it's a curse. Why? For the reasons I mentioned, that if you don't have a vision, if you don't know the story that you want to tell, then you're lost in just, oh, let's shoot this, let's shoot this. And nowadays, cinematographers or filmmakers barely shut down the camera. So you should have this ongoing junk, and there is no selection process. So you have to actually have a very strong vision to know how to work with those tools. And the tools are great. I mean, whether it's drones or GoPros, or even way back when, you know, when the Steadicam just came out. Rocky wouldn't be Rocky if it wasn't for that amazing shot of when he runs out the step. This is all Steadicam. So we have to keep in mind that in order to enjoy the freedom of the digital era, you also have to be extremely, extremely well prepared. So with the disruption of the Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, and Apple TV, and now Disney Plus as of today, their competition is fierce. And I feel that for me, the streamers have actually brought a tremendous amount of opportunities and possibilities for storytelling, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. I have been making documentaries with Netflix and for Netflix for a very, very long time. And I'll tell you the story. 12 or 13 years ago, I finished Color Straight Up, and I get a call from this guy. His name is Ted Sarandis. And he calls me at home, and he said, hi, my name is Ted Sarandis. You don't know me, but I started this company. It's called Netflix. And we have this system where we send DVDs in the mail with this red envelope thing, and then you can return it, and you can have a subscription. And I'm like, all right, that sounds kind of cool. So what do you want from me? And he goes, every film that you have, can I have it? Because I want to use it for my new subscribers. So I had 2 films at the time. I said, okay, sure, you can have it. He gave me $1,000, like whatever. And he took it. Well, you know, next thing what happened. But 12 years later, I'm making a film. I can barely get him on the phone, obviously. But he is the head of Netflix. And there is this loyalty that was created between us because I gave him the trust of a filmmaker to start using my films, and then now he's giving me opportunities to tell my stories. The interesting thing also about Netflix and such is, I think especially Netflix, they don't put a time limit on the film that you're making. So for example, even series. So for example, if the episode holds 20 minutes or it holds 30 minutes, it doesn't matter. They are not bound anymore to the time frame of the network where you gotta hit that second because the ad is coming up or the news has to be right at this moment. You cannot, there's no flexibility. But with Netflix, if I feel like my episode is not holding, it's not holding, it's done. And they have no issue with it, which is really filmmaker friendly because I don't want to drag it to 40 minutes if it doesn't hold, and I don't want to cut it if it does work. So in that sense, you know, we really have a great dialogue with the investor. They don't really interfere in your creative process, and I feel like it's a really, really great challenge. What's happening also, interestingly, as you know, the history of storytelling goes way, way back, and it used to be, in French, le raconteur, the guy, or there was a guy actually, the storyteller who stood in the village and people were around the campfire and people were really listening to this oral storytelling. And in a way it's coming back because we have now the podcast. It's only audio, and it's really interesting to me after this whole evolution and revolution of storytelling, we're back to audio storytelling, and for various reasons. Obviously, you know, I'm from LA, so I listen to it in the car, it's much easier. But I think it's also the idea of that we're bombarded with images and commercials and things we want to see and things we don't want to see especially. And so I feel like we're kind of cleaning out. And it's interesting how the storytelling, this verbal audio storytelling started, and then it became, you know, the tablets, the stone tablets that had scriptures on it, which is now an iPad, or telling story in images with paintings and murals, and which became our storytelling in images as film. So I feel that history kind of repeats itself. We just have better technology. But at the end of the day, a story is a story, and we want to tell a good story. We want to tell a truthful story. And that to me is the essence. Whether you use this tool or that tool, drone or not drone, the essence is to really tell the truth of that subject or the person that you're talking about. With the introduction of AR and VR, augmented reality and virtual reality, on one hand, it added great elements to our storytelling because we have many different dimensions. On the other hand, I also feel that there is danger in it because of the isolation that it creates at times. I have a son who's 21. He can put on his headset and watch porn, as far as I know, whatever, and have sex in VR sex. And he doesn't have to go in it. Well, he doesn't do that. He has a lot of girls, but just saying, could happen. We had that conversation, and he said, "Mom, I don't really have to go anywhere to experience," and that kind of worries me. Whether it's that or whether it's a tour of the world, like you feel like you're everywhere, anywhere you want to be without leaving your room. So what I'm afraid of is that it breaks a sense of community. It breaks the sense of that we are part of an audience. And that's the beauty, of course, of theater, is that it's an event. You're sitting with other people in the dark, and you're chewing popcorn, and you cheer together, and you cry together, and it's something, you know, you can't, your first date, I mean, you can't do that on Netflix on an iPhone. You gotta bring her to the theater and have a first kiss or whatever in the dark. That can never be replaced. But at the same time, I feel that we can take it as far as we can, and humans want to push the boundaries, and artists especially. But at the same time, we have to be very cognizant of the fact that it has risk and it has danger. So like every new tool, we have to know how to use it. So on the other side of this is actually a sense of community that we do gain by showing something, streaming something, a series, a piece of news, elections, whatever it is, that streams at the same time in so many different places in the world. And we're all reacting to it in real time. And that creates a kind of a virtual global community, because we are experiencing an event, a storytelling event that took place at the same time in my home, somebody in Singapore, even with the time difference, we're still sitting at the same time watching the Oscars. And that, I think, is a great advantage, because then what happens? We post on Facebook, on Instagram. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? I just saw this, I just saw that. So somehow it connects us, and it breaks the isolation and the alienation that I was talking about. So as you see, I am struggling between, is it a blessing or is it a curse? It is both. If you use it correctly, it is a blessing. And I think that is really the point. So the one other point I want to touch upon, and by the way, I want to quickly, speaking of Oscars, the Academy of Motion Pictures is an institution that not only gives Oscars, it also has great programs, educational programs, and they are really very much resisting the streaming aspect, because again, the experience of going to the theater and seeing a movie it's something that, you know, the Academy is really proud of, and they don't want to kill it by saying, you know what, you want to see Roma, go and, you know, see it on your little iPhone. That hurts. That hurts. And I'm on the executive committee of the foreign language films. And one of the reasons we are still hanging on to showing the film in theaters, the foreign films only are the only ones you have to watch in theaters in the selection process, is because of the subtitles. So imagine you're watching a film on a little iPhone and you have to read the subtitles. They're going to lose you. And so we're really struggling to keep at least that element intact, so that when we get submissions from other countries, we take into consideration that the filmmaker would have liked us to show the film in a theater so people can actually read the subtitles. And last point, before I open it to question, is journalism. When I started in documentaries, I felt that I was kind of a half journalist and half anthropologist. My really very first film was a documentary about an Arab actor in Tel Aviv who was from an Arab village, al-Fahim, and he was trying to make a career in Tel Aviv as an actor. He's like, yes, I'm an Arab, but I can act, and I'm an actor. So he did a one-man show in theater, and I followed him throughout his life. And I wanted to show that, obviously, you know, he's just a person and an artist like I am, and there's no difference. And then I did a movie in the West, in the Birzeit University, very early on, before Intifada. For the same reason, I wanted to kind of explore for myself if indeed Birzeit is a university that breeds terrorists, or as the slogan, or maybe it's true, I don't know, or is it just a regular university? And I followed a student from Birzeit who was trying to graduate, but because under military occupation, the university was closed a lot, so he couldn't really graduate. So that was my part of exploring the Middle East conflict, and living in Israel, I felt that I had to do that. It wasn't even a choice. And then I did a fiction film, called Pressure, a love story between an Arab and a Jew, and what it took for them to stay together. And the pressure was so strong that they actually could not be together. So I felt that it was my responsibility as a filmmaker, a storyteller, to tell relevant stories and not be lost in some, you know, fictional world that nobody cares about. So that brings me to journalism, which with the new way of storytelling has really made a huge difference and a huge impact, because I feel like these little cameras, first of all, you create a lot more trust, because when you're standing in front of somebody who has a problem, an issue, a trauma, and you have this big camera in front of their face and 5 people are trying to operate the sound and the image, it's never going to be authentic. There's never going to be a situation where they feel really safe and trusting, that they can open up and really tell you their truth. So that was very important. But also I feel like sometimes we even give cameras to people to depict their own story, and I feel that with this new advancement, we gave a voice, and especially journalists, to people who were never heard. We gave a voice to people who had no way to express how they were living in their living condition. That we made the invisible visible. And that for me is a huge, huge thing. And the last anecdote, because I really want you to ask questions, is when we were, like Ido said, we were nominated for College Straight Up, and we were up against a Holocaust movie, and that was kind of tough, and Spike Lee was nominated that year, so that's why we didn't get it. But once we realized that we were nominated, it was less about the film, but it was more about, okay, so now we have something positive to tell in the neighborhood, which was still is infested with gangs, the Crips and the Bloods. And so I sent a white limo to the neighborhood. I called the academy and I said, I'm not going if my kids from the movie are not going. And they're like, are you crazy? We can barely get you 2 tickets. I'm like, no. I have 6 characters in the movie, Latinos and Blacks, and I want them in the Oscars because that's what it's about. So I wiggled some, 7 tickets actually. And I sent a white limo to the hood, and I sent somebody to film it. I was getting ready, sorry I couldn't be there. And it was amazing to see how everybody was out on the street cheering those kids. Press being there not just for, oh, there was a drive-by, there's some activity, there's some voyeurism going on, but it was really to depict a victory. Whether we won or not, it didn't matter. What mattered was that for a moment, there was a status quo. For a moment, the Crips and the Bloods stood together on the street to watch those 6 kids get into the limo and go to the red carpet. And that is the moment I really honestly tell you I'm the most proud of in my whole 35-year career. I told you I was a dinosaur. And so this for me is the impact of storytelling. It's not the film, it's not the award. It really is about shedding a light on the invisible in an authentic and in a way that has integrity and truth. And I hope I can hang on to it for as long as I can. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. Yes, please, Aaron.
So in your message about storytelling, to kind of connect to diplomacy, it seems that the real storytelling process, if it's effective, is building trust, because you're engaging an audience, and but first you're engaging the people who are telling the story. And in a previous career, I was in the media industry and made commercials, and the shortest storytelling is really in a commercial, because you have a limited time to get into this trust and tell the story. So how do you see what you've done over the years really connecting to the process of diplomacy, where we're wrapping our arms around people, asking for their trust?
So that's a really great question. I'll give you an example. I was asked to make a movie. Richard Clarke, who was the anti-terrorism czar during 9/11, had written a book against all enemies, and then he wrote a book called Your Government Failed You right after 9/11. And he asked me through his people to make a film about that book. And I said, you know, I don't know how to visualize national security. Well, what am I going to show? It's all secrets. So I said, let me meet with Mr. Clarke and see if I can relate to him as a person, and if I can tell a personal story rather than just a story about national security. So I met with Mr. Clarke in DC, and we connected right away. But I also understood that he was going to give me a lot of limitations. You can't show this, you can't show that, my personal life is not important, etc., etc. But it was really hard for me to tell a story without having his full collaboration, and like you said, you know, put my arms around him and him around me, so I can really tell the story. But I had to deal with it because, I mean, the man is brilliant. It was a very great challenge for me intellectually to meet that guy on an interview floor. And we created this friendship and trust, and eventually, so for example, in the beginning, he was at his house, and he said, you can't film anything until the interview starts, but I'm a filmmaker, you can trust me. So I had this little camera shooting from the hip. We call it shooting from the hip. So you just walk around like this, and you're shooting, you're pointing the lens, right? And so being a national security guy, he's like, what are you doing there? I'm like, nothing, nothing. And he said, shut down the camera, I know you're shooting. So of course I couldn't do that. So all my tricks had to go out the window. And it was just me and him.